are always grateful to HJC for hosting this, as they have since November of 1999. That's been a lot of meetings and a lot of speakers, and a lot of you have attended many of those, so we're always glad to see you. We do this every, could we ask for cell phones and cell phone conversations to be held outside, Joe?
Whenever you get a chance, we'll start the I got off as soon as I could get there and quit calling.
Where was I? This happens every fourth Wednesday of the month, except when it doesn't. And if you're subscribing to our newspaper, you'll get all that. To subscribe, you go to HoustonTomorrow.org, and there's a little thing to do there. There's an awful lot going on, coming up, so I won't talk about much of it, but you can go pick up a little sheet over here that explains what's up. I will say that on September 24th and 25th, we're going to hold a conference on mega regions and on the idea of the Texas Triangle, which includes Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Austin, and is emerging as an economic entity that we have to think about how this is going to work and how we're going to be collaborating on giant infrastructure and so on. And there are sponsorship opportunities available for that, of course, so there's some stuff over there about that. On the 12th of November, we're going to have a gala fundraiser honoring George Mitchell for his work in sustainable development, so if you'd like to come to that, you can check that out on our website too. And then on October 3rd, Blueprint Houston will hold a third Citizens Congress. And with any luck, I think all but one of the mayoral candidates have agreed. They've all agreed that there's a question of the schedule on one. So hopefully we'll have all four mayoral candidates at that to talk about a general plan for Houston's future. Today we're going to talk about sustainability, the idea of planning for sustainable regions. And Uri Avin is, as far as I know, one of the first guys ever to do this stuff. I mean, I've been following his work for as long as I've been in this game, and he's a star in thinking about how to work on scenarios, how to think about the future, and how to think about sustainability. So you have more about him on the little pieces of paper, and so I won't talk anymore and let him talk. Thanks very much for coming.
Thanks, Dave. Is this, can everyone hear me if I talk like this? Is this good enough at the back? Okay, great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and we've got about an hour and a quarter or so. I plan on talking for maybe 35 minutes or so, and leave quite a lot of time for discussion. So my focus here is on sustainable regions, and a lot of the work has been at the sustainable development, site planning, neighborhood building level. So I'm going to talk about a different scale here, about sustainable regions. The agenda for the next 35 minutes of mine are, if I set the context, and setting the context here will mean focusing on emissions, particularly greenhouse gas emissions, because at the regional level, a lot of the initiatives on sustainability have to do with reducing greenhouse gas, and that, as it applies to HGAC and to much of what you do, translates into looking at vehicle miles of travel and VMT and reductions in VMT, and land use and transit and operations and fuels all feed into that in part. So when I talk about setting the context, I'm setting the context about greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Big deal in lots of states, California obviously, but not yet a big deal in Texas, but likely to become a big deal in the next decade. So then I'm going to give you some examples. If you're going to talk about what it means to practice sustainable regional planning, give some examples of what kinds of things you want to do if you're moving in that direction. And we're going to talk about the Northern Atlanta region and some work we've done there, the Charlotte, Mecklenburg County region, and getting to a much more tangible scale, kind of edge city scale, to talk about some work we've done in Tysons Corner in Northern Virginia. So that's the agenda. Okay. When we talk about greenhouse gas reductions in the transportation sector, there are really 5 legs to the stool. The 3 legs that most people here are going to be familiar with are thinking about things like vehicle efficiency, miles per gallon, low carbon fuels, okay, and then reducing VMT. That's mostly what people talk about when they talk about transportation and being sustainable. But there are 2 more legs to that stool that are really very important. Vehicle and systems operations and construction, maintenance, and agency operations. They're much less sexy than the things we tend to talk about. But for example, eco-friendly driving. If you just train people to drive in a more eco-friendly way, best research on this suggests you can save 10% on emissions. That's a big deal. To get a 10% reduction, you've got to do a whole lot of stuff in transit, land use, and what have you. If you can get 10% from eco-friendly driving techniques, you get a big hit. The same is true of fleet and operations, maintenance, and efficiency. Again, it's not sexy, but you get a lot of bang for the buck. So those are important things. I'm not going to talk about them, I'm just setting the stage. I'm going to focus on VMT primarily. Now, states across the country, and you've got a list of the states on the left in that table, have all been getting into the act, projecting out to 2020, 2025, 2050, and the columns along the top show you where they're trying to get their percentage reduction. So you'll see, for example, that vehicle reduction, Connecticut and Maine and New York are shooting for 50 to 60% of their reductions out of vehicles efficiency, miles per gallon, big numbers. Low carbon fuels, states are all over the place in terms of where they're going to get their emission reductions from. Smart growth and transit, which is what really interests us in this forum probably more than any other category, states are all over the place. Vermont, little rural Vermont with its small villages and few towns hopes to get almost 50% of its reductions from smart growth and transit. Hugely ambitious. Maryland, with more of a track record and more of an urbanized density, hopes to get fully 45% of its reductions from smart growth and transit. Very ambitious goals. Connecticut is much, much less ambitious there. Pennsylvania, much less ambitious. So we're all over the place. People have adopted these state plans, and they've set these targets for percentage reductions, and they're all over the place. What do we know about what works and what doesn't? What do we specifically know about how much you get when you look at VMT reductions, and what parts of VMT reductions land use plays a role in, transit plays a role in, policy plays a role in, parking, pricing, tolling lanes, how much bang for the buck you get on VMT reductions when you do those kinds of things. This is all a new area of research. There's not much out there. About 2 years ago, Uri Avin published Growing Cooler, that many of you may be familiar with, one of the few research-based books in recent years. Next month, Cambridge Systematics will be producing another publication that will get a lot of national attention on this topic. But what's there is slim pickings, and what's there needs to be looked at in a very objective way. Some of it is by biased advocates on either side of the fence. So picking your way through this stuff in a very charged environment will require some homework on your part in terms of where the authors are coming from ideologically. But this picture is a very, very diverse picture. So strategies to reduce VMT. You can talk about mode shifts, moving from cars to carpooling or van pooling. Very effective. We've just finished a national study, WPB, on strategies to reduce global climate warming through transportation interventions. And it turns out that van pooling is one of your big success stories. You get a 7% on average from research nationally and internationally from van pooling. Very effective. So mode shifts, pricing. Everyone talks about tolling. Everyone talks about congestion pricing. What do we know internationally about pricing, land use, telecommuting? And then what happens if you combine all of these things, okay? It's important to note that VMT, vehicle miles traveled, which is the most used measure when people talk about climate control and emissions, VMT had actually been going down significantly in the past 5 decades. Back in the 50s, VMT growth rates were almost 5%. This decade, VMT growth rates are just over 1%, 1.4%. Why might this be? This is a question. Why might VMT growth rate be declining? Anyone have any ideas here? Yeah.
Base
Jeff.
is so large.
Sorry?
The base is so large.
The base is getting large. That is true. And therefore your percent growth rate may be reduced. I'm not sure if the base increasing would affect your percent annual growth rate, would it?
Because our BMP growth is far exceeding population.
Right.
So-
I understand that, but I'm not sure that the population base for this calculation, if it's increasing, would affect your percentage rate of growth. Maybe, I don't know. But other than the base increasing, why else might be VMT be coming down? Vehicle miles traveled. What else is happening in the world? Demographically, what else is happening? Sorry?
Prices.
Right. Prices may be, that may be part of it. So you may be seeing the effect of gas prices, although on average, gas prices on average have not gone way steep, accounting for inflation in the last 50 years. They've been pretty level. Everyone that can own a car in the U.S. pretty much owns a car. Okay? So while people were getting more cars, 2-car households, 3-car households were not usual in the 50s and 60s, but now pretty common, right? So saturation of car ownership means that VMT is coming down. What else has been happening demographically that would account for the reduction in VMT?
Aging population moving out of CBDs.
Okay, but why would that make it come down? That would make it maybe go up.
Because people move closer to their
Okay.
employments.
Okay, so maybe the decentralization of land use is also causing VMT on average to be coming down because people are traveling shorter distances. And there's debate around that. But I think it's a plausible case. But more powerful than that is the fact that most women who now could be working in the workforce are working in the workforce, right? So in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when there was a huge increase in labor force participation rate by women, that's now began to flatten out and it's tapering. There's been little growth in women in the workforce in the last decade. Okay, so these are some of the reasons that it's taking it. But the point here is that you're not getting a lot of bang for the buck by reducing VMT rates of growth anymore because they're coming down for big mega reasons anyhow. So we're working at the margins here when we focus on VMT in terms of its impact. So let me show you some scenarios. Part of our national publication, which you can get from us if you want it, I can send it to you. It's about to be published next month by NCHRB, Transportation Research Board. But in it, we ran some scenarios. And here, the pink line takes you out to the year 2050. Okay, this is the year 2005, I think. And at the end of the bar is 2050. Okay. So if you assume that VMT is going to grow 1.7% annually, a little more than it is in this decade, that's your annual growth rate. You're not going to really do anything radical in VMT growth. It's going to be fairly constant. And you're going to assume that cars are going to be at 36 miles to the gallon, which is a very conservative assumption for the next 30, 40 years, right? Very conservative. 36. You will see an 11% increase in light-duty vehicle greenhouse gases. So that's what you see over here. There's a slight increase with those assumptions. This is a trend case, okay? Now, where people would like to be, most of these state plans, what we have down the left here is emissions. That's what we have down the left. This green line represents where most of these state plans would like to be with greenhouse gas emissions. They want to be way down there, and trend shows you way up here. This goal is a 70% reduction. 70% reduction from 2005 emissions. Very ambitious. Most states are saying things like that. Okay, that's where they want to be. So what's the distance that you have to travel to get this graph to move in the direction you want? What if you assume that VMT growth will only be 1% instead of 1.7 annually? Okay? And what if you assume that cars will be 75 miles per gallon to 2050? And there's 10% operating efficiencies in other ways, okay? That gets you, that combination, and you can see how big a piece, this cream color, sorry, how big a piece the light blue, the top of the graph, okay? That's the moving from 1.7 to 1% annual VMT growth. That's the piece of the pie that you get in this scenario. Most of it comes from aggressive efforts in other categories, not VMT growth. This is the smart growth transit component, okay? If you assume, on the other hand, 0% increase in VMT, you really assume that your policies and your land use and all your VMT-related initiatives have a lot of impact. This is how the graph looks. 1% VMT and fleet is only at 50 miles per gallon, okay? You get down to something like minus 60%, close to your minus 70%. But look how big a chunk of that is comprised of going to zero growth in VMT. What does it mean to have 0% growth in VMT? And what do we know about the chances of getting there? The best recent research on this at TRB last year was presented by Carolyn Rodier at the University of California, and she said it changes over time. 10 years is different than 20, 30, and 40 years. But these little blobs, it's not very bright on the screen, represent different policies. So transit is the green. Transit in 10 years, well, that's a 0% reduction in VMT, right? Transit alone in 10 years will get you just almost insignificant amount. Transit policies alone in 40 years will get you maybe 4% reduction. The top and bottom of these lines represent the range in the data, okay? The big ones, let's take a look at land use. That's the dark blue one. This is a compendium of the best international research on the topic. Okay, land use gets you at best, land use alone gets you at best a reduction of between 0 and 5% in VMT in the long run. And over 50 years, you can argue there'd be a lot of land use change under certain scenarios. So you're not getting in the scheme of things, not getting a lot out of land use alone. Pricing, cordon pricing is the purple, parking pricing is the yellow, congestion pricing is the red. Now we're getting to see maybe slightly bigger numbers. The big numbers are pricing vehicle kilometers traveled. If you price VKT or VMT, you get some big stuff. 50 years out, you can get over 30% reduction. At least you can expect to get a 8% reduction. And fuel pricing also gets you some big bang for the buck. So this is useful to give you a sense of where it makes policy sense to apply intervention. If you combine these as packages, these are all separately done. As packages, if you combine land use and transit, for example, in 40 years' time, you can expect to realize between a 9% and a 20% reduction in VMT, combining those two. If you combine pricing techniques, you get very little, just pricing. Pricing and transit, you get big chunks of impact. No land use, just pricing and transit. Pricing and transit and land use, you can maybe realize far out in time, 33% reduction, at least a 18% reduction. So all of this is useful when you think regionally about what you might want to tackle as your priorities and what bang you get for the buck if you're focused on global climate change. Okay, I'm done with stage 7. What I'm going to focus on now is talk a little bit about, okay, so all this is good, but what does it mean for how you practice planning differently, right? What kinds of things would you do differently to begin to achieve these targets here? What things do you want to focus on? This is the northern Atlanta region. Those of you who here have been to Atlanta, just raise your hand. Oh, okay, good. then you have no reason to fail my quiz. That's about to come up. This is the outer road, it's the outer beltway in Atlanta. The city of Atlanta is down there. So we've got 6 counties. This is the northern sector of the Atlanta region. This has got about 1 million people, about 800 square miles, big area. And the study that I'm going to talk about covers the red dotted boundary. That's the area that I talked about having 1 million people. So lots of you have been to Atlanta, and you all are intimately familiar with Houston. Some work has been done on sprawl. The best known is the sprawl index that was formulated by a number of scholars about 6 years ago, and looked at a number of attributes of metropolitan areas. Looked at 83 areas. So here's the quiz. Given that the Atlanta region and the Houston region are kind of comparable in size, not too far off, in terms of sprawl, with one being the most sprawling, and 83 being the least sprawling for 83 metro areas, where do you think Houston falls? 1 is the least sprawling, 83 is the most sprawling. Where would you place the Houston region in that index? 62. So not very sprawling. 1's the most, not very sprawling, right?
Oh, I thought you said 83.
No. 1 is the most sprawling, 83 is the least sprawling. Try again. 6. 5. Everyone give me 15. Negative 2. Sorry?
23.
23. Okay. 32.
Really?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good data, good research. Atlanta. Where's Atlanta, Dave?
What?
4. Okay, 4. So on this composite index, Houston's in the middle of the pack. Atlanta's way sprawling. Okay, density index. Density. Okay, same story. 1 least dense region, 83 most dense. Where's Houston? Region. Middle. Okay, 41. You don't want to give me higher than 41? Lower than 41. Raise a show of hands. Well, people are intimidated by this quiz. Jonathan?
25.
25, okay. Houston's 47 in terms of density. Atlanta, 15. Much lower density. Centeredness, the amount of centers, which is really relevant to what you all are doing, the amount of centers in the region. Okay, 83 most centered, 1 least centered. Where's Houston? Mixed use, dense centers. Where's Houston? 70. Okay, 24. Where's Atlanta? And Atlanta's got a lot of big cities. Where's Atlanta? If Houston's 24, where's Atlanta?
5.
21. Real close. It's funny, you know, when you actually look at the data. Last question, which is a real interest to HGC. Street connectivity index. Okay. 1 is the least connected as a region. 83 is the most connected. Where's Houston?
2.
2.
25.
36. All right. 36. Where's Atlanta? 3. All right. So Atlanta is a less dense, more sprawling, less connected place by far than Houston. And all that's background to this little bit of analysis here. So the chart here, this was Greta, the new mega agency set up about 10 years ago in the Greater Atlanta region to fix things. Otherwise, they'd get no federal money for air quality reasons. So the question here was, what can we do in the 6-county region in land use and transportation terms to improve sustainability, to reduce VMP? What can we do? What scenarios shall we look at to make that work? Here's a quick cut test. Quick cut just to give you a sense of how bad things or good things are in this 6-county, 1 million person region. The current demand in 2003, that's the height of the bar, right? In commercial, in residential, in the green, about 1/3 of the demand was residential, and the gray, 2/3 was commercial. The road capacity, and we've converted land use here to trips to need for lane miles. And we've compared that with the lane mile capacity at a given level of service from travel demand model, okay? So we've got apples and apples. the capacity of the road system in 2003 was pretty comparable. Things weren't too bad. If you took the projected growth in commercial and residential in the region and the projected improvements in road capacity, you're in the center of two bars. You've got a lot more, you've got a fair bit more demand than you've got supply. If you said, if all of the plans of all of these counties build out, and all of our road improvements are made, even in our aspirational plan, they're all made, right? What do we have? And what you have is on the far right, you've got way, maybe not quite double, but you've got an impossible situation. You've got a situation where major companies will relocate to Boston or Charlotte or elsewhere out of that Atlanta region with that level of congestion if they all get built out. Okay, so this sets the scale for what the sub-area is facing by way of land use challenges based on the current plans. Based on the current plans doesn't mean necessarily based on what the models of the regional agency include. In fact, if you compare what the regional agency models with what the local plans say, all of these blue areas are where the local plans are very, very different than the regional agency assumptions about what they should be. Anything in blue, the regional agency, ARC, was showing as mainly employment, and the local adopted plans and zoning said, no, it's all residential. Because they weren't modeling the existing plans, they were modeling policies and their goals and their projections. When you model the existing plans, it's very, very different, and that's an important cautionary tale. Even though local places may not have zoning, or may not even have plans, or zoning may change a lot, there's still a relative amount of stability there. And in this case, this data analysis was enough to convince the folks that one of the scenarios ought to be the local plans, which is the thing in the middle. So this is household density. So you can see the smart growth scenario on the far right clearly is very different than local plans and different than the current official projections. These actually make a big difference in the results. Here are the results. We're looking at the three scenarios I just showed you, and we're looking at a number of measures. The net value of improvements to get to your quote-unquote vision, the ARC's preferred outcome, is $104 billion, sorry, $10.4 billion. Local plans would cost just over $4 billion, and doing nothing pretty much is less than, that's $2 billion, okay. So when you look at the benefits, when you apply dollars to time saved, to accidents, to a whole lot of measures that you can quantify, you get lots of benefits from this smart growth vision. Not bad, but less from the local plans and much less from trends. Annual costs vary widely. Annual benefits vary widely, but the cost-benefit ratio, surprisingly, is almost identical in each case. So in the end, it's a choice about policies, values, and impacts that you've got to persuade local folks about than necessarily dollars. It costs a lot more to get where you want to go, but the benefits are a lot more. That's a sell that we planners have to make all the time. In VMT terms, at the regional level, that's all you get out of the smart growth vision in the middle. You get a 7%, close to 7% reduction in VMT regionally. Now, in various corridors and in various sub-areas, it may be better. You may be doing better than 7%. But region-wide, it's a big region, it's a mature region, the Atlanta region, not a huge reduction. And you find for these kinds of macro studies, and I would bet you the same would be true with the Houston region, when you do the macro studies, if you do more than 10% VMT reduction, you're doing very well. Most of them are 2 to 3 to 4%. Now, at the corridor scale, the Katy Freeway or whatever, it may be different. You may get 15% reduction. And if you move jobs and housing around, you can play with it some. Okay, so this is the kind of work you want to be doing when you talk about sustainability, this kind of sensitivity testing. Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, much smaller than Houston, Atlanta. Region's only 2.2 million people in the 7-county region. But nevertheless, an interesting place, much less sprawling than Atlanta. And they have a vision, a very strong vision. This is the central county, and this is the downtown CBD that has 13% of all the office space, private office space in the region. Very strong downtown second largest banking center in the country, except as of a year ago, after New York. Big, powerful banking financial center, and their vision was one of centers and corridors, and corresponds to some historical towns, the little red blobs in these 5 corridors that were going to be densified and served with transit. That was the vision. However, when you look at the actual density on the right, and were then just beginning to finish a beltway. They didn't have a beltway. You see, the only dense places are the downtown and a little bit down the south corridor. The rest of the corridor is pretty low density. These are thresholds to even begin to talk about transit. The University of North Carolina is out there. That's a little blob. That's nice. But these 5 corridors don't really amount to this vision being successful, do they? So
Is this population we're looking at?
that is population and job density. It's a composite of job and population density. And when you do this, you want to do a composite measure. You don't want to do just the one or the other. You want to add them together because they work together. So we were asked in 6 months to do analysis for a tax referendum for a quarter-cent sales tax that they were going to be voting on because it would raise $50 million a year towards transit. And the question was, will people believe us and vote for it? And so we had to do some quick order of magnitude alternatives to test their vision, which they were very committed to. Business as usual trends. We said there are 2 basic strategies. One is to focus jobs in these corridors. The other is to focus jobs and housing in these corridors. It's going to be hard to push maybe multifamily into these corridors. People may be more accepting of job centers. Let's see the difference between. That was what we tested. We did market analysis to support our assumptions. We said, okay, in our trend scenario, we today are going to keep going with 40% of multifamily in the corridors and 55% in the wedges, and only 3% multifamily downtown. In our desired mixed-use, more intense plan, we're going to move multifamily up to 54%. In the wedges, it's going to go down. In the center city, we're going to be very aggressive. And these are market feasible. We were pushing it a little bit. These are market offices, same story. We're going to push offices into the planned corridors, take them out of the wedges, and put a lot more offices downtown. This set the parameters for how much and where we're going to test. When we say test, most of you assume you're going to run some kind of models to look at the outcomes for roads and transit and so forth. The problem with most models is that they're completely insensitive to real land use stuff. Density, mix of uses, proximity, trip generation rates. Most models don't even account for those things. And your model probably falls into that family. Most models aren't set up to account for urban design, quality of life, all of these fine-grained things the model doesn't care about, doesn't know about. So we, rather than only running the conventional model, also had a quick sketch planning model developed by Robert Severo that we've applied in several places with Robert that looks at these variables, very simple equation, based on 100, in this case 314 light rail stations around the country. So it's empirical data. It's not speculative. You apply the equation to Charlotte, and you find, when you apply these various variables, the most important, by the way, is service frequency. Far more important than density. Okay? Service frequency, the elasticity. For every 10% increase in service frequency, you get a 0.72% increase in ridership. Okay? That's how elasticities work, right? So that's the big one. Frequency. Densities are nice, but they're not as big. What does this mean? It means that for these 5 corridors, when you run the conventional model in blue and the sensitive sketch model in green, you actually show the benefits of land use much more significantly. There's about a 17% increase in the ridership when you use this model than your conventional model. This is important because as new starts criteria change, as they will over the next year, for funding transit, and as land use gets to be more prominent and environmental effects are counted more in the new starts funding formula, the ability to do this kind of fine-grained analysis means a lot for getting money for transit. And most gross models can't do this. So there'll be a need, as you do planning, to, in a more fine-grained way, account for mixed-use centers, densities, so that it can respond to new criteria that will be coming out of the federal government for funding of these initiatives. So again, this is the example of the kind of work and thinking you need to be doing. Beyond that, in the Charlotte case, what we created was a tool where as density increases along the bottom, and where we peg density with those black dots, okay, so for residential, it's a solid line. For employment, it's that line, and for the combo, it's the dashed line. So we were fairly modest in our increases, but this directly tells you how much your increase in ridership for this particular, this happens to be one of the corridors, what your increase in ridership will be. So there's a tool here that allows you to decide on pain, gain for pain, how much you want to densify and how much does it mean for ridership. I also did this for cost per rider. So again, these are the kinds of tools that are useful when you're in a world where land use is taken more seriously for federal funding of transit. Okay, last example, Tysons Corner, and then I'm done. Tysons Corner, as an animal, is familiar to you all in this neck of the woods, given all the edge cities that you have in and around Houston. Houston and Atlanta probably vie for having the most edge cities in the country. Tysons Corner is one of the granddaddies. It's 2,000 acres, 2,300 acres. Been around for a while. It's got a huge amount of office. Its office component, 63 million square feet of office. Anyone know how much downtown Houston has by way of million square feet of office space? It's a lot less. Downtown Houston, all the stuff you see, it's a lot less than 63 million, I think. Anyhow, this is the number. This would be the equivalent of the 12th biggest downtown in the U.S. Obviously, huge congestion. Big news, 4 new metro stations. Underground metro stations, well, not underground, in this case above ground, but heavy rail is coming to Tysons Corner in a couple of years' time. So our challenge was to transform this wasteland, where half of the land is parking, 50% of the land is at-grade parking, is limited structured parking, transform this into a walkable mixed-use downtown. Because transit's coming and everyone wants to take advantage of that and blah, 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 blah.